It's my pleasure to introduce Kevin Graaf. Kevin is a computer scientist and independent researcher based in New York, whose primary research interests are digital typography and text encoding, ancient and minority or minoritized writing systems.
A word I learned from you. Okay, well, thanks for the lovely introduction. And this is my talk. I've got the, how do you do the laser pointer? Oh, there we go. Got the Gregorian and Mayan date appropriately. So I just want to say, because everything you see is human made. So just for context. So as the introduction said about me, kind of coming at this from a computer science background, I'm not a linguist, and that kind of informs both the way I look at things, but also the preoccupations I have. So, and like Helen said, I'm interested in digital typography and text encoding. So I just love this picture. So I just always need an excuse to put it on the screen. Some brief history, though. This is something I learned recently, which is that Konorazov, who you see pictured here, who really deciphered the Maya script, or rediscovered, I should say, how to understand it, and faced a lot of opposition in that, was using computers from the beginning. I actually learned this like a couple days ago, which I think is really, really fascinating. And I would really like to dig more into that. For time, it's whatever. There was also something I really wanted to talk to you guys about, which is that I know that I learned in the 70s at Harvey Mudd College, there was a program using computers for Maya studies. I found the person who worked on it. I emailed him and he said, "Oh, I threw all that stuff away in the 90s." So I'm still holding out hope that maybe there's a copy hidden in some, closet somewhere in California, but we'll see. Wait, was there something else there? Oh, right. Ancient scripts may not known to some, but were initially actually excluded from Unicode. But so I mentioned that because originally it was seen as kind of not in the remit of computer encoding. This stuff is dead. Who cares about it? But that's no longer the case. Um, but computers have clearly proven valuable in assembling corpora and stuff like that. But I think we've really only begun to properly assess the computational character of the scripts themselves. And I'll talk about what I mean by that later. And you'd see some nice Maya writing there. So, dramatis personae, let's briefly talk about Luwian, Egyptian, and of course Maya, my chief interest here. So here's just an example of Luwian, used to, or Anatolian hieroglyphs used to write Luwian, and it's written in a Bustarshita in order. But within the lines, you have these little like stacking motion right here. And I have to confess, I don't know a ton about Anatolian hieroglyphs, but based on what I do know, it seems very chaotic. Egyptian, of course, needs no introduction. We've had several fantastic talks about it, but you do have this kind of quadrat structure where the scribes seem to really value, not wasting space, as the term was used earlier. And then, of course, we have Maya, which is the main thing I'll be talking about. It's also organized into quadrats, kind of like Egyptian, but in a different way. We'll see what that means too. And it's kind of read in this zigzag order. But each of these has these are not characters, right? They're multiple meaningful components. And the kind of terminology I really like here is that there's a global reading order and there's a local reading order. And these are not necessarily the same thing, as we saw from Balin's talk. I think in particular, the importance of distinguishing between the two of those. So go back here. So why computerized hieroglyphs? Well, I actually think, based on what I know anyway, in Egyptology, this is actually a serious need. I mean, people publish books about it, and occasionally there's even new text. And I own a copy of this, so I can assure you that it's real. But I also think that it actually is a practical need. As a student of Maya myself, I will say that a sort of typographic presentation, this is a picture of the Dresden Codex, could help quite a lot. Oftentimes, I'll be reading a text and the author will say, "Oh, well, this says this," and I don't know what they're talking about. So it would be because you're dealing with very poor quality inscriptions or vases or things like that. There is periodic interest in revival of Maya for modern Mayan languages, which I think is a very tantalizing possibility. That's, of course, for those communities to decide what to do with, but it would be great to give them the tools if they're interested. And this last point right here, one of these last points, is sort of my chief interest, which is that when we really challenge what text is, it gives us a better understanding of it, kind of text simpliciter, unqualified. And maybe I do want to send an email to Luann. That's my right. But also, it's just interesting, which is why we're all here, right? So, what are hieroglyphs? I know this was something that was discussed in the last wave. Like, is this a coherent category? And I actually think it is, at least in this respect. I won't claim that this is an exhaustive account, but in a non-hieroglyphic script, there is what I'm calling a sort of a neutral layout, which is to say that if you have a stream of letters, let's say, you can broadly determine merely from that information what a neutral way to present that would be. Yeah, you can do crazy stuff, but I think most people would view that, if I was, not having letters aligned to the baseline, that would be viewed as kind of odd. It would be a decision, an explicit decision. It's not neutral. But in hieroglyphic scripts, we really can't. I mean, we can have this sort of global order, right? But within in this local way, within the quadrat, you can't like derive that information just from merely the sequence of graphemes themselves. And I know grapheme is kind of a tendentious term, but I just mean this in a very theoretically modest way. But what I want to say is that this formatting is inextricably part of the individuated text. And these scripts are really irreducibly two-dimensional. I mentioned being a computer scientist, so I like to think about these things instead of information theoretic terms. And that's to say, if we go back to the Egyptian, if you just gave me the list in reading order, there's information that's lost that cannot be recovered merely from the list of you gave me the Gardner numbers for each of these. You can't like recover in the general case how it's supposed to be laid out. And we actually see a shockingly fantastic example of just this phenomenon on lintel 27 from the Yaxchilan site. And this is taken from Kettinen and Helmke's introduction to my hieroglyphs. So these are essentially the same thing. The text, I should say, there is a glyph that right here, that's not in this one, but essentially these are saying the same thing. And kind of remarkably, the same phrase is repeated in the same text, actually, in the same lintel. But you can see they're laid out quite differently. In this case, you've got these two quadrats, and in this case, they're kind of compressed into one. And so this isn't a matter of spelling. It's kind of taken it to calling it like hyperspelling. It's like a layer above spelling altogether. And you can't just know, as evidenced by this example, okay, I have these signs. How is it normatively laid out? Because the answer is there isn't a normative answer. And so I'd like to share these two quotes that I think are kind of interesting. This is from the Unicode specification, and it says that plain text is the underlying content stream to which formatting can be applied. It must contain enough information to permit the text to be rendered legibly and nothing more. Well, I think this is quite problematic as a category because I mean, we could unpack what is legible, right? But in the hieroglyphic case, I think it's just kind of unambiguous. And then there's a great quote from this paper, Unicode from a Linguistic Point of View by Yannis Haralambos and Martin Durst. They say, Unicode inherently assumes that the geometry of one-dimensional graphetic sequences, as long as there is no two-dimensional higher structure, such as a list or a table, carries no syntactic or semantic information. But there are cases where human creativity has transcended this model. And I think this is just simply unambiguously the case in the case of hieroglyphic scripts. So talk about the status quo. There's clearly no technical barrier to handling individual hieroglyphic scripts. Software like JSesh, WinGlyph, which I'm told was really good and is no more. I've never used it. Those exist, but I think we really want a universal solution. And why is that? Well, for one thing, if you do offline rendering of text, you just make an image, you lose the normal kind of user interaction primitives that you have on a computer. You can't scroll through it. You can't select stuff. It's kind of in a subordinated role, which is unfortunate. Researchers are also at the mercy of software vendors, and researchers are primarily not programmers, nor should they have to be. WinGlyph was retired. Philosophically, and this is my, I guess, main concern, if normal, quote unquote, text handling software can't handle text as a category, hieroglyphs are text, then in what sense can it said be complete? And the thing is, the economic incentive is never going to be there. There is never going to be like an economic case for making hieroglyphic word processors. Like none of us are rich, right? I mean, obviously, we picked the wrong profession. And so we have to be kind of the people who are interested in this have to be free riders, I would say. So towards Maya computerization, let's just talk about some challenges that Maya in particular has. So it's first of all, it's not fully deciphered. So we have to be modest by necessity. And I think that this is something, there are a few people working on Maya texting code. There's a couple teams that I'm aware of anyway. And I think that that all have really had to take this to heart. How should backspace work? Actually, how should it work? The thing is, first of all, we can't just ask a user because unfortunately they're dead. And we can't resort to a print tradition, which had the effect of like flattening the Latin alphabet. That didn't exist for these scripts, so we can't resort to that. We clearly need to be the cursor needs to be able to sort of travel into the syllable block, or the quadrat, which is I think not possible in conventional typography software. So yeah, and the analogy I would say is like imagine if you could only edit an alphabetic text at the granular words. That would be so obnoxious. How do we render it? I mean, the thing is with Maya the glyphs, they can be shrunk, squeezed, clipped, overlaid. There's not really like a bounded number of shape, like final concrete shapes that you can resort to. Um, and computers, it's a new modality of writing unto its own. The antecedent forms can't tell us the answer. So I don't want to talk about this too much because it may not be of interest and we're just for time reasons, but I have been working on a kind of different parallel means of encoding text to Unicode that I call telecode. If anyone here has done any work with like TEI or digital humanities stuff, I would say it's kind of similar to that. There are two very important differences that I can tell you about offline. But in essence, you have a structured representation of text, very similar to like XML. But I will say, I would point attention to this. The idea is that you can ignore structure you don't care about quite easily. And so I give this little example where, you have like these sort of like tags, but you have your graphemes in green, and then you have this sort of structure layered on top of the graphemes. So the more perhaps interesting in here is a typography engine I worked on called Dubsar, the Sumerian word for scribe. And my big claim is that a font properly conceived of, a computer font is a function, a mathematical function from abstract text to a visual representation. And so in essence, if anyone knows Metafont, by example, Knuth's Metafont, it's kind of conceptually similar to that. This is also drastically simpler. The current implementation you will see, which is about 2,500 lines of code versus hundreds of thousands. And I can talk more about the details offline to anyone technically interested in that matter. So let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, we're good. So we're going to look at a demo now, and I will let Pippa cue that up. That's okay. So we start with the Latin alphabet, not very interesting. And this font is adapted from a public domain font called the Hershey fonts. So we can just type hello, etc. Now I want to call your attention to one thing, which is the way the cursor works. This is an idea adapted from the work of a computer scientist by the name of Jeff Raskin, who worked on the original Macintosh project. And so the idea here is that the dark gray is what's sort of behind you, what will be deleted if you press backspace. And the light gray is what's in front of you, and that will be what's deleted if you press delete, what's in front of you. And so we can scroll back and forth, and you can see, so for example, right now I'm at the end of the line, so if I press delete, it will delete the line. So I think that, but we'll see why I think this is necessary. But let's do something a little more interesting. I'm going to refresh, and we will open up the Maya font, which will hopefully work. Okay, so we have, let me lose track of the time. I've made these sort of filler characters. They're not a real character, they're not a real image, but it can give you an idea of what you can do. So you can just type, whatever, and you see the sort of telecode representation in there. The G is like general, but doesn't mean anything. Don't worry about the meaning. But you can see already we have this zigzag pattern that we can scroll through. So I can do this, and then we go to the next line, and so forth. But we can do something a little more interesting, which is that here we have a quadrat. And if I press Shift left, I can enter it. Now the cursor has disappeared. We can type a glyph, but we can also type another. And there is an algorithm that I've written that I really agonized over, I might add, over how to lay this out. I was working on this and I was like, how do I do this? And I was like, oh, this is a knapsack problem. You know, like the NP versus P problem, you know, like a Millennium Prize. So if I figured this out, I would be a millionaire and the most important mathematician on earth, which I'm not. So I have to be a little more modest, but also it doesn't need to be, the layout doesn't need to be optimal. It just needs to be predictable. So you have a predictable editing experience. And what I do think is that if we study the manuscripts closely enough, or the text, I should say, the corpora, I think that there is an algorithm, so to speak, that the scribes did employ, in the sense that there was a method that they followed in laying out text that can be reified as a program, as a function. But we can do more interesting things. We can type horizontal, we can type glyphs, we can do really, really just horribly perverse stuff like this, which is just never tested. But let's do something a little more interesting. Let's type actual text. So let's go into our quadra. And of course, it's a Maya inscription, so it's going to begin with a date, a very tedious date. So, okay. So we'll put the Baktun symbol in, and like I said, pretend that there is a 13. We'll put the 0 tune, and then we can do the next one. And then that's also 13, so we'll ignore that. This is the 13th tune. Like I said, pretend that it's there. And then it is the 8th Winal, which is this. And then it is the 4th Keen. Yes. So we have our date. Now that is our long count date. Well, there's more. There's more. So it is the 12th, which I don't think also is not going to work. But let's just put, this is wrong, but just imagine one, right? It is the of the Tolkien cycle. So if we put in, no, that's not right either. Oh, right. Okay, so this is the symbol for the current sulking date, but sulking dates have this little cartouche that they're in. So we can add an attribute to that, but like so. So you see this appears. Now we can also, now there's also a little pedestal that goes over it. Now notice that the layout of this, our algorithm sort of failed here for a second. I needed to add a little, and text has unfortunately disappeared, a little attribute to make this stretch vertically. Now let's add our Hob date. And I will note we are in a rather interesting period in the Maya calendar, which is that our conference corresponds almost exactly with the intercalary period of the Hob cycle. So it's kind of auspicious in a way. So that is the second, let's see. 6, 7. Yes, here we go. So we will also add this attribute here to make it kind of stretch down. Now, let me preface this. This is very, very speculative. I was wondering what I should type. So we've got our date, modulo the certain missing errors. I was very nervous about trying to typographically interpret a real text. So I have composed a speculative translation into Maya, and I want anyone who has not more knowledge than I to bear with me in any grammatical mistakes I may have made. But so there is a really great word. So first, let's start with our preposition t, at, with, on. And there's a really great word for like a kind of public ceremony, like chanio, which is a conference is like a public ceremony, right? So we can add our glyphs, but I happen to know exactly how this is laid out in the original document that I'm copying from, which is that these use these reduced forms. So if we highlight, oops, if we, oh wait, hold on. Yeah, deleted the wrong thing. Okay, so if we highlight over these, we can change them to these sort of reduced forms, and we can also change this to the reduced form, and then make it like this. Now, we're also in Cambridge, so I've had this idea that maybe there's sort of alternate universe where the Maya borrowed like Latin. Also, it's like much easier to transcribe Latin into the writing system, so I kind of cheated a little bit. I mean, that's the reason why. So we type ha, na, ta, ba. So like gan tab would be. And so here's our so we're at the Cambridge conference. Now we get something quite cool. So we want to say, okay, so we're talking about writing. So we'll type, very, very oh, right, I forgot what I was going to put first. So I was thinking about how do I write like electrically. And this I'm a little bit like again quite uncertain about the syntax here, but we can also have our preposition again, and then there is a really great word chahook, um, like this. But let's make this look a little nicer. So we'll add this attribute. So I'm trying to say like with lightning, with electricity. That was my best guess of how to translate this. Now we will go to another thing, and now we're going to have a very, very common verb. We're going to say u, ba, and then we will add this attribute again. So it's like he or she writes. He or she writes. I'll be a little narcissistic. I will write my own name. So let's okay, so I'll say briefly about this. Again, I was like trying to borrow from the Latin, like coingenos, because easier to render, less. I guess Kevin's not that bad, but anyway, I also liked this. Well, oh no, I do remember the reason. If I were to naively transcribe my name, there's a glyph that's not really work appropriate. So, um, now I want to show off a kind of interesting feature, which is that maybe I just really like this macaw clip, which I do. I like it quite a lot. Now, notice that the layout has changed, but the scrolling still obeys the reading order. This is a feature I think that would be quite difficult to do in conventional typography software. But do that, and then finally we will type one more thing, which is a title I hope I have earned, which is, no, that's not right. There we go. And I also love this one that's highlighted there too. So we say, Sibal, or something like that, the scribe, or really, it's kind of like Mr. Like and Ahau, it's kind of like, Mr. President, Madam Secretary, stuff like that. Now, so we have Maya text with those two errors. 13 didn't work for some reason. So something I think that's really important about doing kind of interactive Maya text entry right here, really talking about engaging interactively with the text, is that I did the Latin font, or I should say I converted the Latin font first. And I intentionally didn't add any features to support Maya. This font that I created, and these are my own drawings, by the way, I should add. There's no extra Maya specific feature. Anything that's Maya specific is embedded in the font itself. So if you use the software that I've written, if a software vendor used this to do their font rendering, you would automatically gain the ability to work with Maya text in this interactive way that I've demoed for you right now. So I think that kind of achieves my goal of sort of what I was saying, free writing. Let's switch back to the presentation. And then here we go. So what's the future work? Well, there is a lifetime of work to be done here, to be sure. Something I did not put is that I think if you were maybe a charitable person might say the drawings that I made are quaint. I would like to get them to a sort of presentation quality level. In particular, what I would like is a font that's parameterized by the different writing styles. So the kind of the codical style versus the inscriptional or epigraphic style Maya, the style that you see on pottery and vases and stuff like that. I also need more coverage. The font that I have right now is kind of indexed to what I wanted to present. There's that. I really would like to formally specify this sort of encoding that I have done for the script, which you saw a little bit of. The thing about that, like I said, there are other people working on Maya text encoding, people with much more knowledge than I do about the script. I have somewhat different goals in some respect, I guess, that are, I think, complementary with what they're working on. But I think that just requires more research, honestly, on what the script demands. I'd really like to develop fonts for other hieroglyphic scripts, in particular Egyptian. I'd love to work with an Egyptologist if that's something you find interesting. I'd also like to integrate the software into like a real everyday application software. So in particular, I'm working on, this is web-based. I ported it to the web. By the way, I'm so glad that I got an email from the Views team like a month ahead. Be like, "Yo, you can't use your own laptop, by the way," because I was planning to do that. But I'd like to have like kind of a shim that you can use so you can edit text on the web. Anyone can. So those are kind of my big goals, I would say. Obviously, always looking for collaboration, insight from linguists, grapholinguist, if that's a term that one prefers, historical linguist and stuff like that. But I think that I'm happy with the progress that I made. I do think this is the first time anyone's done interactive Maya text entry, which perhaps a dubious distinction, I'm not sure. But nevertheless, I'm happy with that progress. So, since it's another question time, anyone has any questions?